In 1950, the New York Times declared Ernest Hemingway to be the most important writer since Shakespeare. To create the one true sentence, the truest sentence that you know, as he wrote in A Movable Feast, was the core and mission of his life. Those true sentences have changed the face of literature. He was the quintessential American writer, yet schools have threatened to ban his books, and his aggressively masculine attitudes to love, death, and war have come under fire from the politically correct. His life mirrored his writing, and Hemingway became an icon of red-blooded machismo. He was a war hero in Italy, a game hunter in Africa, and a deep-sea fisherman in Cuba. But beneath the rugged exterior lay a man touched by tragedy and haunted by death. And while his genius illuminated his generation, the lost generation of the First World War, depression led him into despair and darkness. Every man's life ends the same way, Hemingway wrote, and it's only the details of how he lived and how he died that distinguishes one man from another.
From the day he was born until about age 6 at least, his mother dressed him like a girl and brought him up as the twin to his elder sister Marceline.
Ernest Miller Hemingway was born on July the 21st, 1899, to Grace Hall Hemingway, and like many Victorian mothers, she dressed him in girls' clothes. His mother had ambitions of being an opera singer. She had a fine voice and had once performed at Madison Square Garden. She couldn't continue her career because her eyes were too sensitive to the stage lights. Grace never let her family forget that she could have been a star. But "I have you children," she would say. Settling for life as a music teacher, Grace married Ed Hemingway, a physician in Oak Park, a respectable suburb of Chicago. Ed was a keen outdoorsman, and Ernest inherited his passion.
For 2 months during the summer, they'd go up to this camp in northern Michigan on a lake, and there he was allowed to dress as a boy. There he would sort of had the boy's role, and his father gave him a gun and took him hunting and fishing.
Ed was a tough man, but it was Grace who had the whip hand. She bullied her husband into developing his meager musical skills and put him in charge of all the housework. Hemingway one day wrote of a character like his father.
He was married to a woman with whom he had no more in common than a coyote has with a white female poodle. For he was no wolf, my father. He was sentimental, and like all sentimental people, he was cruel.
Ed was often harsh with his children when they misbehaved and made them pray for forgiveness after he whipped them with a razor strap. Sometimes, after a thrashing, Ernest would go out to the shed, take out his shotgun and set his father's head in his sights. But he tried to please his parents, especially his mother, and felt deep guilt over his wrongdoing. Grace remembered that he would whip himself so Mama won't have to punish. In high school, Ernest always wanted to be the center of attention. He took every dare and laughed it off when he hurt himself. Girls liked him, but he was very shy. He opened his sister's mail to see what the dames thought of him. He used to help decorate the hall for school dances, but always left before they began. Ernest played football, but he was a poor athlete, so he would invent stories of heroics on the field. It was in those stories that Hemingway found his true talent. He began to write for the school newspaper, and his short story about a hunter who committed suicide was published in the Tabular Literary Magazine. He had found his métier. His uncle was a close friend of the editor of the Kansas City Star. Ernest used his uncle's contacts to get a job as a cub reporter for the newspaper, where he handled the crime stories. Although initially shy about interviewing people about their private lives, Hemingway took to the craft of reporting with great energy and diligence. The Star had its own style that emphasized short sentences and vigorous English. He said they were the best rules he ever learned for the business of writing. But life changed suddenly and dramatically following the assassination of an obscure archduke across the Atlantic. In 1917, patriotic fervor engulfed America's youth, and Hemingway was caught up in the tide. Rejected by the army because of his poor eyesight, he volunteered for the Red Cross Ambulance Division in Italy.
His real first introduction, of course, to the foreign world was during World War I, when he went to Italy. So much stuff is happening that you don't really get to absorb much of what's around you from a cultural point of view. But he nevertheless did get to spend enough time and build some friendships there that later on in his life became important.
In Italy, Hemingway experienced his first taste of freedom, drinking and carousing with the other drivers. However, he soon grew eager for action and told a friend, "I'm fed up. There's nothing here but scenery, and too damn much of that. I'm going to get out of this ambulance section and see if I can't find out where the war is." A few days later, on the night of July the 8th, 1918, the Italians were being bombarded by the Austrians from across the River Piave. He was delivering chocolate rations and cigarettes to Italian soldiers when a shell hit the front line. One man was killed, and Hemingway's leg was riddled with shrapnel fragments. He said his life floated out of him like a silk handkerchief.